Never meet your heroes, they say. And for some who worked with Gene Kelly, Hollywood's golden boy of dance, those words rang painfully true. Behind his megawatt smile and dazzling routines lay a much more complicated man. Gene Kelly was one of classic Hollywood's most beloved icons, an actor, dancer, and director who embodied postwar optimism and charm. Unlike peers like Bing Crosby or Frank Sinatra, his public image was nearly spotless, free of tabloid drama or shady ties. But behind closed doors, a different picture emerged. While he could be warm and inspiring, many coworkers described him as temperamental, controlling, and egotistical, with a sharp temper and a fondness for much younger women. These contradictions came to a head in 3 unforgettable scandals: an on-set nightmare that nearly broke a young co-star, a betrayal that ended a lifelong friendship, and a controversial relationship that shocked the public. 1. Debbie Reynolds' Ordeal on Singin' in the Rain. In 1952, Gene Kelly co-directed and starred in the classic musical Singin' in the Rain. His leading lady, Debbie Reynolds, was just 19 years old, a bright newcomer hoping to learn from the 39-year-old Kelly. What should have been a dream role turned into a nightmare on set. Kelly quickly earned a reputation as a cruel taskmaster, as Reynolds described him. He was harsh and demanding, criticizing every step she took and never offering a single word of encouragement. Debbie was not a trained dancer like Kelly, or co-star Donald O'Connor, and she later admitted, "I had 3 months to learn what Gene Kelly and Donald O'Connor had been doing for years." And Kelly didn't cut her any slack. Kelly's perfectionism pushed young Debbie to her physical limits. During the filming of the cheerful song, Good Morning, Kelly insisted on take after take of an intense dance number that lasted all day, from 8 a.m. until 11 p.m. By the end of that marathon session, Reynolds' feet were bleeding through her shoes, and she literally couldn't move. The exhausted teenager had to be carried off set and spent 2 days recovering on doctor's orders. "My feet were bleeding. I couldn't move," she recalled. This was the behind-the-scenes reality of Singin' in the Rain. While Kelly smiled on camera, off camera, he was drilling his co-star past the point of pain. As if the brutal rehearsals weren't bad enough, things took an even more disturbing turn when it came time to film a romantic scene. During Debbie Reynolds' first on-screen kiss with Gene Kelly, the script called for a simple Hollywood embrace. But when the cameras rolled, Kelly shocked Reynolds by suddenly shoving his tongue into her mouth, a full French kiss that she never consented to. The 19-year-old actress was completely caught off guard. "Ew! What was that?" she screamed as she pushed him away, horrified. In a panic, Debbie ran around the set yelling for a Coca-Cola to rinse out her mouth. She had been raised very sheltered. By her own account, she'd never even been French kissed before. In her memoir Unsinkable, Reynolds wrote, "I was an innocent kid. It felt like an assault. I was stunned that this 39-year-old man would do this to me." To young Debbie, the moment was nothing short of traumatic. What was supposed to be a sweet movie kiss had turned into a personal violation in front of the entire crew. The on-set abuse wasn't just physical. It took an emotional toll as well. Gene Kelly's constant criticism and intimidation eventually broke Debbie Reynolds down in tears. One day, unable to hold herself together after yet another scolding from Kelly, Debbie fled to an empty studio, hid under a piano, and cried her eyes out. In a twist straight out of a Hollywood script, the person who found her sobbing wasn't Gene Kelly. It was Fred Astaire, the legendary dancer, who happened to be working next door. Astaire gently comforted the young actress, telling her, "You're not going to die. That's what it's like to learn to dance. If you're not sweating, you're not doing it right." His kindness in that moment was the encouragement that Kelly never gave. It speaks volumes that another star had to step in to console the movie's heroine, while her leading man and director offered no apology for driving her to that state. Despite the behind-the-scenes drama, Reynolds persevered. She completed the film, matching Kelly smile for smile on screen as if nothing was wrong. Singin' in the Rain became a timeless classic and is often remembered as a joyful, innocent romp. But the truth is, there was real anguish behind those dazzling dance numbers. Years later, Debbie Reynolds made sure the world knew what she had endured. Calling Gene Kelly out in her memoir, she pulled back the curtain on his behavior, the cruel training, the unsolicited kiss, and made it clear how deeply it affected her. 2. Steal your best friend's wife. Gene Kelly wasn't just hard on newcomers. Even his closest friends and collaborators felt the sting of his darker side. Perhaps the most dramatic example was the feud with Stanley Donen, the director who co-created some of Kelly's greatest films. The two met when Kelly was starring on Broadway in the late 1930s, and Donen was just a teenage chorus boy who idolized him. Kelly became Donen's mentor, and as Donen grew up, he became Kelly's right-hand man in Hollywood, co-directing and choreographing films side by side. By the early 1950s, they were an inseparable creative team, jointly responsible for redefining the Hollywood musical. But behind their smiling publicity photos, tensions were brewing. Working with Gene Kelly could be complicated. Donen later admitted, in a very gentlemanly way, that as brilliant as Kelly was, he could be difficult with me and everyone else off-screen. The scandal that ended Kelly and Donen's friendship was essentially a Hollywood love triangle. The third person in the triangle was Gene Coyne, a talented dancer who had been Gene Kelly's dance assistant and protege for years. John was part of their inner circle, working closely with both men on films like On the Town. She also happened to be Stanley Donen's wife. By the mid-1950s, Gene Kelly's first marriage to actress Betsy Blair was falling apart. And during that turbulent time, Gene Coyne shocked everyone. She confessed that she was in love with Gene Kelly. This meant she was not only betraying her husband Stanley Donen, but also effectively choosing Kelly over her marriage. When Donen learned that his wife had fallen for his best friend and collaborator, he was understandably furious. The personal betrayal was devastating, and its impact on the Kelly-Donen working relationship was fatal. Stanley Donen's reaction was swift and final. The longtime friends had a bitter falling out. Donen immediately ended both his personal friendship with Kelly and their professional partnership. It was as if the dynamic duo behind so many joyous musicals simply imploded. In 1957, Gene Kelly divorced Betsy Blair. Shortly afterward, Stanley Donen divorced Gene Coyne. With Donen out of the picture, Gene Kelly and Jane were free to be together, and indeed, they married in 1960. Kelly and Jane Coyne stayed married until her death in 1973, and they had 2 children together. But while Kelly moved on in life, Stanley Donen never quite forgave or forgot what happened. The rupture between Kelly and Donen was so deep that even decades later, Donen refused to speak about Gene Kelly, except in the most diplomatic terms. In one interview years afterward, Donen acknowledged Kelly's extraordinary talent, calling him among the wonders of the 20th century as a performer. But then he added tellingly, "What I didn't like was his manner off-screen." He confirmed that their collaboration wasn't always the happiest thing, an understatement hinting at all that unspoken resentment. In fact, when a PBS documentary was being made about Gene Kelly's life long after Kelly had passed, Stanley Donen was invited to participate and share his memories. Donen flat out refused. He told the filmmakers that he didn't want to be involved because he didn't have anything kind to say about Gene. 3. A 47-year age gap. Gene Kelly's scandalous final love story. By the time Gene Kelly reached his final years, he had one more scandalous story to write, this time in his personal life. It's no secret that Gene Kelly had a lifelong pattern of being attracted to younger women, sometimes much younger. In fact, his romantic history started out in a way that would raise eyebrows today. His first wife, Betsy Blair, was only 17 years old when Gene, at 29, married her in 1941. Betsy had actually been just 15 when they met and fell in love. Kelly was 27 then. Even in the 1940s, that 12-year age gap in Blair's youth were significant enough to draw some criticism. By all accounts, Kelly and Betsy's marriage was genuine. They were married for over 15 years, but it established a clear precedent. Gene Kelly did not mind a May-December romance. Little could anyone predict that in Kelly's twilight years, he would embark on a relationship that made that first marriage look tame by comparison. Fast forward to the 1980s. Gene Kelly was a widower in his 70s, still active and charismatic, when fate introduced him to a woman named Patricia Ward. It was 1985, and 73-year-old Kelly was working as the host, narrator, on a documentary project about the Smithsonian Museum. Patricia Ward was a 26-year-old writer on the project, cultured and educated, but remarkably she had no idea who Gene Kelly was at first. Imagine not recognizing the star of Singin' in the Rain, but Patricia later admitted, "His name meant nothing to me, initially." Perhaps that was part of the appeal for Gene. Despite the nearly 47-year age difference, the two hit it off professionally and personally. By the time the documentary wrapped, Patricia had finally watched some of Kelly's famous films and was thoroughly impressed. But by then, she knew Gene the person, not just the legend. The friendship blossomed into something more, and a few years later, romance was in the air. Kelly and Patricia Ward dated for a while, away from the spotlight. Then, in 1990, they shocked Hollywood by announcing their marriage. Gene Kelly was 77 years old on his wedding day. The bride was 31. The age gap, 46 years, was so extreme that many people literally did a double take. It was the kind of May-December marriage that gossip columnists live for. The press coverage was intense, with headlines about the legendary entertainer and his bride young enough to be his granddaughter. Kelly, well aware of how this looked, decided to play a little trick on the media. He told a white lie about Patricia's age, claiming that his new wife was 36, when in reality she was 31. Perhaps he figured that shaving 5 years off wouldn't hurt, and that a 41-year gap sounded slightly less scandalous than a 46-year gap. Of course, the fib was quickly uncovered, and it arguably only added to the buzz. People joked that Gene Kelly was so used to fiction, after a lifetime in Hollywood, that he couldn't resist fictionalizing his bride's age. The reaction from the public and press was a mix of fascination, admiration, and gossip. Some cynics wondered if Patricia was after the elderly star's money, or if Kelly was having a late-life crisis. But those who knew the couple insist that it was a genuine love match. Despite all the eyebrow-raising, Patricia Ward Kelly herself never batted an eye at the age difference. She later said she didn't even think about it. "He was so terribly handsome. He didn't seem old to me," she noted. In fact, Patricia often said that meeting Gene in his older years was a blessing. She got him at a time when he was mature, content, and had nothing left to prove. While tabloids might have been titillated by the odd pairing, the two of them were reportedly very happy together. Friends described Patricia as bringing a spark of energy into Gene's life in his final years. Of course, the marriage didn't have the luxury of lasting decades. Nature had its way. In the mid-1990s, Gene Kelly's health declined. He suffered a series of strokes, and in 1996, at the age of 83, he passed away with Patricia by his side. They had been married for 6 years. Despite how others may have judged their union, Patricia Ward Kelly remained devoted to Gene to the end. She became, and still is, the keeper of his legacy, often speaking up to defend his memory and share his story with new generations. In a sense, this final scandal of Gene Kelly's life, marrying a woman nearly half a century younger, turned out not to be a scandal at all to the people who mattered. It was an unconventional love story, certainly, but a sincere one.